Yeah, thanks for dropping in where you're coming from. And I will screen share and just do a couple quick announcements, and then we'll jump over to our panel. So, perfect. Okay, so today I'm actually really excited because we are talking about handling rejection and imposter syndrome. And here you can just see this quick cartoon of, PhD life, what people think you do, and then, the reality. So the reality, there's some mixed emotions that sometimes happen: deciding to quit, deciding not to quit, fear, oh my gosh, that didn't work, or that's broken, right? Like, things happen during your PhD, and things sometimes don't work. So, again, I'm really excited to discuss this because when I started in my PhD, I came directly out of my undergrad, and a lot of these things would have been helpful to know sooner rather than later. And so again, it's really important that we, really discuss, and demystify kind of the points where failure is normal in graduate school, and then really talk about how do we fail gracefully, and how do we fail to really, project us forward. So that's going to be today's discussion, and this is our second to last meeting. So we will have our last meeting next month in April, because it is March. And so today, just a quick outline. We'll have this short welcome, and then we'll flip it over to two really awesome professors here at Purdue in order to really talk and dig into this topic a bit more. Then after around 7:50, we'll move into our circles, and then we'll wrap up at the end. And again, our circles will go with breakout rooms, and you guys will be able to move yourself into those. So I'm really excited today at our Grad Track session to welcome both Professor Chelsea Davis, who's an assistant professor in materials engineering, and then also Professor Levon Esters, who is the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Faculty Affairs over in Purdue Polytechnic, and he's also a professor in ag. And today we're again going to discuss a little bit more about imposter syndrome, reshaping our kind of viewpoints of what failure is and is not, and talking a little bit more about kind of what kind of rejection and what this all looks like. So I really want to address the elephant in the room and have just a candid conversation. And so again, as I have a couple questions to start us off, but I would definitely love if you guys want to raise your hand if you have questions, or even if you want to drop a question in the chat. Would love to make this as interactive as possible. And so I guess I'm going to quickly kick it over. I'll start with Chelsea, and then we'll go to Levon to maybe share a little bit about you. I gave a high level of where you are, but maybe share a little bit about yourself. Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Chelsea Davis. I am, as Jackie said, I'm an assistant professor in the School of Materials Engineering here at Purdue, and I'm about to submit my documents for tenure, which is very exciting. To give you a sense of my academic background, I grew up in a small rural town in North Carolina, west of Asheville, so way up in the mountains. I went to school at NC State University and received a degree in textile engineering. So from there, I went off wholly unprepared into a master's and PhD program at the University of Massachusetts. And Amherst has a really strong polymer school. So I got a degree, 2 degrees in polymer science and engineering there. After that, I wasn't ready. I didn't feel confident. I felt like I was an imposter. So I went and obtained 2 postdoctoral fellowships, one working in Paris at the ESPCI, which is kind of a fancy sort of MIT-ish school in Paris, working on a project sponsored by Michelin. And then after 2 years in Paris, I came back and took another postdoc at NIST, which is a national lab sponsored by within the Department of Commerce. And I worked there for 2 years, actually got an offer to stay on as a federal employee. So I did that. And about 3 years in, I realized that academia was the place for me. And so in 2017, I came here.
All right. Can you all hear me? Good. Good evening or good afternoon, I guess, for those who are like Daria, who's in California. My name is Levon Esters, and I'm a professor here at Purdue University. And as was shared earlier, I'm also the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Faculty Affairs in the Purdue Polytechnic, which is one of the 10 colleges, I believe, at Purdue University. See, I've been at Purdue now 13 years. Prior to that, I was at Iowa State University for 5, so I've been a professor for almost 20. Have gone through the system from assistant to full professor here. My tenure home is in the College of Agriculture. I'm a social scientist by training, so education. So I teach courses like statistics and learning theory and research design, data analysis. And I've had what people kind of know me for in terms of my expertise is mentoring. I do a lot of work in graduate education, especially as it relates to Black graduate students. I've had a steady pipeline of Black grad students probably for the last 10 of my last 13 years, perhaps, which is not common at an institution like Penn State. And so got my PhD at Penn State, and I'm a 2-time HBCU alum. So I went to Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, Florida for my bachelor's degree in agricultural business. And then my master's degree is from North Carolina A&T State University. So I lived in Greensboro, North Carolina, loved every minute of that. And in education, and then got my PhD at Penn State, graduated from Penn State in December of 2003, and then started as a professor at Iowa State in January of 2004. So literally graduated in December and started within a month as a professor. And have been doing it ever since. I've enjoyed it immensely. Great work. I love working with graduate students. Early in my career, I worked a lot with undergrads, probably for the first 7 years of my career, and then the last 10 or so been strictly grad education. And I've fallen in love with grad education. And so I do a lot of work in that space. And so I'm really excited to be here with you all, talking with you all today about this topic, but also just engaging with individuals who have an interest in pursuing a graduate degree. And I'm from Chicago originally. I forgot to mention I'm from Chicago. I always tell people I'm from the south side of Chicago. I'm a huge Cubs fan. So for those of you who know anything about Chicago, it's like you don't do that. But I'm a huge Cubs fan. If you've never been to Wrigley Field, you know why I like the Cubs, among other things. And huge sports junkie. And I'm immersed in March Madness right now. But so I'm glad to have a break to get some work done until Thursday night. So yeah, that's it. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you, Jackie.
Great. Thank you both for introducing yourself. So again, like a wealth of knowledge here with our two panelists, and really excited because they have such experience in academia and they've seen a lot of different things. So I'm going to kind of throw out the question because I think we all define it a little differently, but it feels the same. So what is imposter syndrome? Can you define what that is in your own words, and maybe an example of, has this happened to you in the past, and how did you confront it? So whoever wants to start first.
So you want to go?
Yeah, I'll throw out what I think the definition is and sort of what I've pieced together over the past several years. Imposter syndrome to me is that feeling that you get when you believe that you truly have tricked everyone in the room into thinking that your credentials are better than you are. I think, yeah, that was a slip of the tongue, but that's what I meant. It's this idea that you are vastly underqualified for the job that you currently hold, and that you have just snowed everyone in the room and snowed the higher ups into thinking that you should have the position that they've offered you. It's that feeling that I have tricked people into thinking that I belong here. And it can be crippling at times.
And if I may add, before Chelsea continues on the second part of Jackie's question, is I agree with what was said. Again, it's notion of not feeling like you belong, or that you're not as competent as or intelligent as you may think. But also I would add that it's this feeling, you have this feeling as though you're a fraud.
Yeah.
So that in a nutshell is what imposter syndrome is. And it rears its ugly head among all Americans, all individuals, excuse me, especially women and people of color, Black and brown students in this case. So that's as we talk about it more, don't feel ashamed as we define it now, if you felt like that, because it's something that a lot of individuals have experienced and feel. And so I just wanted to make sure I added that, but Chelsea hit it on the head with her when she started us out.
Yeah. And I will say that if you don't feel it, that's okay, but you will continue to feel it, and it might even get stronger as you progress through your career. As someone who has tricked people all the way up into now being a professor at a fancy school, yeah, I've tricked them all the way along. Haha. So that's, yeah, it doesn't go away. Jackie, I can't think of a good example. Can you try repeating the question one more time and just seeing if it triggers something?
Yeah, it's just that if you've experienced imposter syndrome in a very specific way, potentially share that. And while you're thinking, I will echo that, whether you're in grad school or in industry or wherever you decide to go, you might feel this, and it's okay. And I think one of the ways, thinking of a way to combat it is to kind of look at what you've done and to make a list and keep yourself accountable and say, no, I deserve to be here. I've worked my butt off and I'm here for a reason. So, so maybe, maybe describing.
I got one.
Yeah.
All it takes is to hear just a little bit more about it. And you're like, oh, I remember that. Okay. So last month, I received an award. So this is going to sound like bragging, but I totally don't mean it to, right? So I received an award, which is called like the Early Career Adhesion Scientist Award. I study adhesion. I study interfaces. That's kind of my thing. So the Adhesion Society gives this award to one person every year to honor somebody before they get tenure. And when I got this award, it comes with like, you give a plenary talk at the conference. And that didn't occur to me when I won the award, but then I had to start putting together the talk. And I was shaking. I was very upset because I was recalling the talk of one of my colleagues who I like and is good, but he had given the talk the year before, and it just blew everyone away. It was exceptional. And so my work is good. It's solid. I know that, but my work's not great, right? It's good. So I found myself freaking out. And one of my buddies was like, well, haven't you been going to this meeting for 15 years? You've been secretary of this society. Like, you know these people. Why don't you go back and find all your old presentations? And I ended up putting together a timeline using the title slide from every presentation I'd ever given at this conference. And that was such a weird sort of grounding moment for me, where it just brought me back. And I was like, you know what? I've given 14 talks at this meeting. Like, I am a part of this society. I am an expert in this field. And I ended up presenting that as the second slide of my presentation, just to be like, look, I'm here. I know what I'm doing. I've been coming to this society for a long time. And by doing that, it was a way to get over my nerves in the moment, but it also helped me prepare for the presentation from a place of authority, which was an oddly reassuring kind of experience. So that's a very recent time that I've struggled with imposter syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate Chelsea, you sharing that. So the example, and I wrote down some notes. I took my assignment serious when Jackie asked me to do this. So I wrote some notes down so I wouldn't forget anything because I want to make sure I shared as much as I could. But what I wrote down in response to this question is this. So early in my career, so the question was, have I experienced imposter syndrome? So the example I'm going to share is early in my career as an assistant professor when I was at Iowa State. And being, I see those who are represented, who I see your faces on the screen, many of you are students of color. And so for me, it was being in an all-white department. And it wasn't that anyone said or did anything to me, but it was the role of the environment in perpetuating, if you will, this notion of imposter syndrome. And what it did, it caused me to question my role and place in the department and in the profession, to be honest. And then what resulted from that, from this experience, was at times feeling of inadequacy and self-doubt. But then things changed. And so as I thought about this, the researcher in me said, I was thinking about this today in a meeting that I was in. And so what I did, I took it a step further. I really took my assignment serious. And so I'm going to place in the chat for you all to read. I can't be a professor and not give you a homework assignment. So in the chat, I'm linking an article for you. And it's actually an article about Jackie and Chelsea contextualizing the imposter syndrome. And it talks about the role of the environment and how it can contribute to these feelings. It's a really fascinating article. So I would encourage you all to please read it at your leisure. But it does attend to that which I just shared with you, was the role of the environment. And again, for me being a Black faculty member in an all-white department, again, Iowa State, let's be clear, Iowa State treated me well when I left Iowa State to come to Purdue because I thought Purdue was a better place, and it has been for me in my career. But for being an only Black faculty member in that department in Iowa, that's what occurred. And so I think that's the most vivid example, Jackie, that I would share with you all today.
Thank you. Thank you. And so, I think that, some of the things that you're hearing is that, imposter syndrome sometimes never goes away. And so it's really important to learn, how do I function with it? And how can, again, I kind of reshift my mindset and reframe like how I'm looking at a specific situation. And so I guess, do you guys have it, Chelsea or Levon, do you have any suggestions about how you do that, or how do you turn your imposter syndrome into that champion mindset?
I've been going first. You can take this one.
Or do you have a mantra, or how do you catch it? How do you check yourself when you feel it coming up?
Yeah. So okay. So I thought about this, and so this is, you all don't have the question in front of you. It's question number 3. And so I was thinking about this today, and the number one thing I would tell you, and I'm telling you something that I do, something that I tell my graduate students. I coach girls softball and girls basketball. It's something I tell my athletes when I was coaching, and that is, I can do it. That's what I say. And I share this. Actually, when you get this in the chat, you may think I'm playing, but if I were to bring on any of my grad students on this call, they would tell you, Dr. E, they call me Dr. E here at Purdue. This is what I send students. So I just put in the chat a YouTube link to The Little Engine That Could. So you all should actually watch that video. It's 4 minutes, but it's a powerful story about you can do it, right? And I actually give this to all my grad students when they're writing their dissertation or thesis and they have some self-doubt. I send this to them, and I also send an email attached to it. But what I tell myself, and again, what I tell my students, is that I can do it. And again, there's a lot of relevance to that story in that 4-minute clip that I sent you. And I think the second thing I would offer up is this. It's important, everyone, that you surround yourself with individuals who will support you, but who will also challenge you to be your best and to reach new heights. So you don't want yes people, right, around you all the time. You want people that will support you, but that'll also say, you know what, Jackie, you probably should, maybe if you would have thought about it this way, or have you thought about it this way? Have you considered this as an option? Those sorts of conversations, right? And I think the degree to which you can surround yourself with individuals like that, it can go a long way in sustaining you and to combating this notion of imposter syndrome. But again, I would encourage you. I know many of you probably have heard the story a little bit and could, but it's 4 minutes. Check it out, and you'll see what I mean when you watch it. So I'll stop there, and Chelsea, you can take over.
Yeah, so I kind of love that idea of you can do it. Like you can do it. Just put your head down, do the work, and incrementally you can do it. The thing that imposter syndrome can do to you, if you let it, is prevent you from seeking opportunities. I think that's the number one worst thing that imposter syndrome can do, because it can lead to this paralysis that makes it really hard. Oh, well, I'm already an imposter in this role, so clearly I'm not qualified for XYZ, that position, that job, that award, that recognition. So I don't have the reference, but there have been studies where men win more awards than women. And for years, for decades, organizations have been like, but we want to give awards to women, but women don't apply. And if you don't apply for that award, if you don't apply for that fellowship, if you don't apply to that graduate school, you 100% will not get it. And that's the thing that imposter syndrome stops us from. So I don't have a specific example of how I've turned imposter syndrome into a champion mindset, but I would say incrementally, the thing that I have trained myself to do is seek feedback. I seek feedback all the time. That's our job, right? That is your job as an academic. If you choose to go into graduate school, your job is to seek feedback. You write papers and send them out to reviewers. You write proposals and send them to panels to be reviewed. You write a document about your entire professional life and send it to your department to be reviewed. You are constantly seeking feedback if you're doing it right? So I have, in my research group, I have graduate students mentoring undergrads, and I train the undergraduate students to approach their mentors and say, what am I doing wrong? How can I do this better? How can I improve? I train my graduate students to come to me and ask, what am I doing wrong? How can I do this better? How can I improve? I am constantly doing this to my near peer mentors, my actual mentors, and my department head. I'm always like, was this enough? Do I need to do more? How can I adjust? Not just to meet the expectations, but to exceed the expectations. And to me, constantly seeking feedback, probably to a degree that is too much, has made it so that imposter syndrome feels comfortable because I'm getting feedback all the time. I don't know how helpful that is, but that's what I have found to work the best for me in my profession.
So I like this idea. I'm going off script, guys. Sorry. I like this idea of surrounding yourself with people who can lift you up and people who can support and challenge you at the same time. I think that you guys mentioned, you can have an academic advisor, maybe a professor like that. I think one important question to really talk about is, how do you talk about grad school and surround yourself with kind of those types of people? And how do you talk about grad school with family and friends who maybe have not been through it, right? Like, how do you relate it back to your family? How can you still get that family kind of support and love if you're going through something maybe your family have never gone through before?
So I think one of the first things that, if that's the case, if you're come from a family and maybe you're first generation college student, but also first generation college graduate student for that matter. I think there's a lot of value in talking to your peers who may have similar backgrounds in you and learn from them, because they may have had the experience that you're about to meet up with yourself, and they can give you some valuable advice. There may be, I know there are professors here at Purdue, whether you believe it or not, who are first generation college students and who were first generation graduate students as well, who had to battle some of those same issues, if you will. So I think there's tremendous value in, again, identifying peers that have had that experience and talking about how they navigate it, talking to professors who can help you think through how to navigate it with your family. Again, I just think that there's, you can't, I can't overstate the importance of getting advice and getting good advice, right? It can help you out in a lot of ways. And I think in this case, in terms of this question, I think the degree to which you can identify peers who may have had that experience, and again, professors and others, maybe a postdoc, all these folks are not off limits for you to seek advice from.
Yeah, and it's something that you like. I know asking for feedback is not what this session is about, but this is currently my favorite book. This is what I'm reading in this moment. It's called Thanks for the Feedback. And it's literally about how to give and get feedback in a constructive way. These are the folks that wrote Difficult Conversations or whatever, Critical Conversations maybe. It's probably at the bottom of Difficult Conversations. It is at the bottom of the book. I have learned so much from this, as far as not just asking help, but asking help in a way that will be most constructive to me. This is that idea of you've got to sort of manage your manager kind of situation. Your mentor can only help you as much as you let them know you need help. So that's been really, really helpful for me. Yeah, just ask feedback all the time. And then every little piece of feedback you get doesn't hurt as much, and it doesn't erode your confidence as much, because you sort of build up this resilience, so that now when I receive reviews on a paper, oh my gosh, you guys, we got one the other day. It was bad. Like, it was bad. It was an invited article, so we rushed to submit it, and it was bad. So when the reviews came back, I gave it to the student that had written the paper, and we talked through it, and he was angry. And I was like, no, every one of these is an opportunity where we weren't clear in our explanation. We're going to learn from every one of these. Every time the reviewer says this, and you're like, but I said that on page 4. Well, they were on page 2, so you should have said it then, right? So every comment we tied back to a learning opportunity or an opportunity to improve. And we sent it back and got comments back, and they're like, this is awesome. So it's going to get published, right? So yeah, feedback is my answer to imposter syndrome, like 100%.
And I think you'll find that that's pretty common in academia, that you will get criticism, and it's not meant to be an attack against you. It's just kind of how the academic process works. That it's like, have you considered this? And some people can say that in a nicer way than others, but that's how, again, you're like, maybe I haven't considered this, and then you kind of follow that rabbit hole for your research or for whatever you're juggling at the moment. And so just again, remembering it's not an attack against you when you're getting this feedback or criticism. It's always a learning opportunity there. And so I see Mateo's question about kind of flipping the imposter syndrome question on its head. Are there positive aspects to imposter syndrome? I don't know, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I saw that question, and it's a great question, Mateo, so thank you. I think, one thing that it could result in is and the individual maybe being more mindful of maybe areas that they may need to improve in, right? You don't want to obsess over it because you may be highly competent and you may be overthinking, if you will, but I do think it could cause you to maybe sit back and think and say, okay, am I as prepared as I thought I was, and those sorts of things. So I do think there could be some, and also to your point of humility, I think it could result in that as well. But for those of you who want to be at least a scholar for a little bit of this topic and read into it, it talks about this notion of some of the sources of imposter syndrome and how it starts when you're young, and how you may have parents or caregivers who have these overly exaggerated expectations for you, right? And you don't want to do anything wrong. So I think you have to be careful and find that balance between it. But I do think that there could be, whether it be humility or this notion of being awakened to, if you will, of have you done your due diligence in preparing for that moment, whatever that moment is.
Yeah, I've gotten to a point where it's not comfortable. I don't like imposter syndrome, but as long as it's not crippling and preventing you from seeking new opportunities and putting yourself forward for accolades and positions and the graduate schools that maybe you aren't 100% qualified for, but maybe you're 80% qualified for. I like the idea of imposter syndrome. If I ever get in a situation where I don't have a tiny bit of imposter syndrome, that makes me uncomfortable because I never want to be the smartest person in the room. I anticipate that everyone on this call is a lifelong learner, right? We like getting more information and seeking more knowledge. And if suddenly I find myself in a room where I have all the knowledge, I'm doing it wrong, right? Because I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to grow in that meeting. And this is not in a sophomore level mechanics class where obviously I have the knowledge, I have the textbook, I have the solutions manual. That's not what I'm talking about. But in every other aspect of my life, I heard, I'm not going to quote it because I don't remember the quote, but I watched some documentary and there was this amazing physicist giving an interview. And she basically put imposter syndrome in a nutshell. And she was like, the more in depth you go into your field, the more you realize just sort of the expanse of human knowledge. Because every time you're like, oh, I think I might learn something about peel mechanics, you learn that there's this whole world of peel mechanics knowledge out there. Or maybe I want to do viscoelastic contact mechanics, and there's this whole body of literature on that. And so the deeper you go into your field, imposter syndrome should almost get worse in a healthy way, because you realize how little you know relative to what's out there. Whereas when you're an undergrad, after you've mastered sort of the core curriculum, you're like, I know some stuff. It's like, do you? So I get uncomfortable if I don't feel imposter syndrome anymore. I think it's a good gut check for, am I in the place where I should be and working with the people I should be working with? Yeah, so I like it a little.
It certainly is a balance. You need that foundation, right? But once you have that foundation, it's important to be kind of true to yourself with what you know and what you don't know, right? I think that that's one of the things many first-year grad students struggle with, because you guys, everyone on this call, you guys are excellent, undergrads or grad students, what you know, right? But you have to be very transparent about what you don't know, because again, that's how you grow, right? So I'm gonna again kind of throw this back in the context of our undergrads on the call, as they're thinking about their current studies. And as they're thinking about grad school, Chelsea, I know you touched upon, some of the things that, the paper with your grad student, how learning opportunity, and that's one thing that that you'll certainly tackle as a grad student. But what are some other roadblocks or obstacles that that our grad students might face in their first few years of grad school? And when this happens, what are some techniques that we can use to fail gracefully and, again, like, fail forward and learn from your mistakes?
Chelsea, if I may, so I think one of the things that comes to mind first is, because I imagine everyone on this call, you all are probably far better students than I was in undergrad. That's why you're on this call, right? But I think one of the first things that comes to mind is when you get to grad school, you may not earn A's at the clip that you were earning them in undergrad. And for a lot of students, that can be debilitating, right? Oh, I didn't get an A. And I was kind of the same way, especially when I went to my PhD. But then I learned, even more so as a professor now, that I'm not saying you should earn a B or a B minus, but my point is this: I'd much rather a student of mine, one of my advisees, earn a B minus in stats and know how to do it than earn an A and they struggle. I came pretty close to minoring in stats at Penn State, and I recall earning a C in one course. But now I look back to where I am now, I teach stats as a course, right? I've done everything from structural equation modeling to factor analysis to discriminant analysis, you name it, I've done it. And I feel pretty good in doing it myself and teaching students. So for me, earning that C, at the time it hurt, right? But now I look back almost 20 years later, that C was worth it because it taught me the value of working harder and mastering, if you will, quote unquote, right? Mastering the content. So you would never know I got a C. If you ask any of my students, they would tell you, I didn't know Dr. E had a C in stats and whatever course that was. So I think, that's probably one of the first things you will experience as a graduate student is not earning A's and A plus at the clip that you may be earning them at undergrad.
And also, if you're an experimentalist, especially if you don't have a ton of undergraduate research experience and you're coming into lab, as I did, pretty much a blank slate, experiments are hard and will go wrong a lot before they go right. And an experiment could go bad, and it doesn't mean that you are bad. So this is something I teach my students all the time, because we have really fiddly little experiments that we do. And it was something I did in graduate school. I found, and it was very unhealthy, I tied my self-worth to how things were going in lab in any given day. So my first 2 years of graduate school, when nothing was working in the lab, were some of the darkest times of my life. And finally, the way that I overcame it was to seek advice and go to my graduate advisor and just be like, look, I've tried everything that I can think of, which is this much. What should we do? And it was hard because he really wanted it to work and I wanted it to work, but we abandoned the first 2 years of work that I did from my PhD. None of those results are in my thesis. We never published any of that. So I have a PhD based solely on 3 years worth of work. But it looks like 5 years worth of work because I learned so many things from that failure the first 2 years that I was able to do double or triple the amount of work that a first-year student was capable of by resetting and starting over in my third year. it ended up working out okay, right? We all get the same PhD in the end. But yeah, you are not, like, your self-worth is not the same to your experiments. Like, things can go badly in lab, and that doesn't mean that you are bad. That was something that I needed to learn. It's not really imposter syndrome related, but again, that was hard. That was really hard, man.
Yeah, and if I may add something else, Jackie and Chelsea, I wrote this down and I want to make sure I read it so you all understand, one, the sincerity in how I'm saying it, but also the importance of it. And that is this: mistakes and setbacks happen in grad school, right? It's part of the process. For me, it's how you learn, or what you learn from the mistakes, are what matters most. And I want you all to really remember that. It's what you learn or how you learn from the mistakes that matters most. And I think that all too often gets lost in the process. I mean, it happens in all walks of life, whether it be sports, whether it be, singing in a choir, you may hit the wrong note, whatever. I mean, but how did you learn? Take a time to reflect. You hit the wrong key, right? Okay, how will I adjust next time? So it's how you react. That says a lot more about your character than anything, in my opinion. So I wanted to make sure I added that, Jackie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And again, if anyone has any questions or any about this topic in general, feel free to drop them into the chat or raise your hand. And I'm gonna jump down our list to what types of successes do you celebrate professionally, and how? Because grad school, again, you're gonna have all these trials you're going to work your way through. You might feel a little imposter, but at the end of the day, you're going to get your PhD, right? For these students on the call, or you're going to obtain, your next step. And so how do you celebrate, and how do you celebrate professionally, and how?
So the reason that I am a faculty member and not a federal staff scientist, I could currently be a ZP4 at NIST. That's what my job title would be. The reason that I don't do that is because I missed mentoring younger and newer students in the lab. And so for me, sure, we write papers and students graduate and do dissertations and all of that. But for me, when an undergrad or a first-year grad student gets their first meaningful result in lab and they know it, and they're so excited that they can't wait, and they're texting me at like 3 a.m. to show me some picture that they took on the microscope, that's what I celebrate professionally, right? When you have that moment and you look around for your lab mate to high five them, that's when you celebrate, right? I hope that you all experience that at least once in grad school. Even if you're computational, go down the hall and high five your colleague. It is the little wins, celebrating every time that you prove your hypothesis right or definitively prove your hypothesis wrong, is, for me, why I do this job, is to watch people experience that for the first time. It's kind of addictive. So yeah, celebrate the little things when you make stuff work. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, and however that celebration occurs, that's you. Maybe it's eating ice cream. Maybe it's walking with your dog in a park. Maybe it's taking a little weekend trip. But you need to, as I like to say, do what works for you. I think that's the number one thing. And for me, in terms of how I celebrate my successes, I mean, I don't do this often because I'm just not my personality. I mean, if it's something significant, I will post about it. Like I was awarded a Fulbright last year. So then, thank you. And so I'll post about that. And but to be honest, a lot of what I share, a lot of the successes I share are those of my grad students. And then if you ask anyone, that's just how I am. I've always been that way because it's not about me. But I do every once in a while, like I may tweet something, I may post something on Facebook or Instagram. But, I will treat myself, whether it be, buying me something or going to the mall or, I don't know. It just depends on what the situation is. But you have to do something for yourself because a graduate student it's a marathon in many ways, right? And so you have to take time out to do for yourself to make yourself feel good, and all of y'all will have tons of successes when you make that decision. So be sure to take time out to celebrate.
So true. Okay, any questions from our students? Any last words from our panelists? Any words of wisdom to part with, or anything we didn't cover that you want to share?
I think, again, I want to thank you, Jackie, and I see Janet, you're on here, so thank you all for reaching out. I really kind of appreciate you all reaching out to me, having me participate in your activities. It's great, so I thank you for that, and thanks to you, Chelsea, for being on here. But I think what I would tell everyone is, you can do it, right? You wouldn't be on this call if you didn't have the ability to be in this program. Run your own race. It's like one of my grad students likes to say, always said, run your own race. Don't compare yourself to others. But say comparison is a thief of joy. I believe something to that effect, something like that. But have confidence in your abilities, I think, is the last thing I would say. So I think if you keep those things in mind, among other things, other advice that you get from those on this call, your peers, your family members, and professors and the like, you'll do just fine.
Yeah. I don't want to follow that. That's really good. Jefferson did leave one question of, do we necessarily have to become comfortable with failure? I hope that I didn't say become comfortable with failure. I said become comfortable with the feeling of imposter syndrome and become comfortable with getting feedback, especially if it's critical feedback, and learn how to take criticism and learn how to take feedback. I don't think any of us would be as objectively successful as we have become if we were comfortable with failure. I'm not saying accept failure. Please, please, please don't hear me say that. I'm saying be comfortable knowing you're not the smartest person in the room, and that maybe you have tricked some folks into letting you into that room, but lean in and do the work, because at the end of the day, you're going to create something new. You're going to discover something new. You're going to advance knowledge, and it's going to be awesome. But no, don't become comfortable with failure. That would be bad advice. I hope you're not taking that away from this call. Yeah, I'm glad you asked.
Yes.
Wonderful. And so let's give a virtual round of applause to Chelsea and Levon and thank them for their time. Excellent. And thank you again so much for sharing your experiences and kind of pulling it all back. So and so at this point we'll say thank you and let Chelsea and Levon kind of sign off. And I'm going to drop a couple questions for your circles in the chat, and we are going to move into breakout rooms for our remainder of the time. So dropping some questions in the chat there, and I am opening all of our breakout rooms. So feel free again to hit the breakout room button and move yourself into your circles. And so you'll be debriefing a little bit on this conversation in smaller groups. There's some questions in the action pack. So feel free to do that. And I'm putting mentors, feel free to share some of your experiences as well. So feel free to slide on over if Yeah, you should be able to. Let me know if you're having any issues with that or if you need me to move you.